Chameleon versus Lexington. This shouldn't even be a conversation. Right, hopefully we can all agree that Chameleon, if used properly, basically wins all the time, near enough regardless of what you put it up against. Hopefully, at least. Well, all except this guy, Shannon Hall 8870. What do you mean by best in slot? Burst DPS is typically best in slot. And if that's the metric, then Lexington takes the crown. There are actual spreadsheets about damage over time and burst DPS. This is like one of those moments of where someone comes preaching to me about my own friggin' numbers. I've had it a few times on Reddit. There's been a few people on Reddit that try and use my own numbers and be like, he said this. And I'm like, no, he didn't. Yeah, he did. And I'm like, that's me. No, I didn't. Bit of back and forth. Then he claims he used a Division 2 calculator and it's better in burst damage. And then he goes on about how, like, you can't use the talent because there's a build-up. Well, if build-up or, like, a condition to a talent working is a problem and by your definition can't be calculated with DPS, that means we can't calculate Breadbasket, Killer, Optimist, Strained, Close and Personal, Sadist, Eyeless, Ignited, Vindictive, Ranger, where it's always active, we can calculate, depending on what range though. Oh, that might get a bit interesting. Flatline, we'll be able to calculate that because it's not always active. Sledgehammer, Thunderstrike, In Sync, Rifleman, Boomerang, Determined, Behind You, Precision Strike, Measured, because of where it changes. Like, you wouldn't be able to calculate that apparently. First Blood, Lucky Shot, well, Lucky Shot will be, no, Lucky Shot does nothing. Naked and First Blood will be, we'll be able to calculate them. Behind You, Determined, Unwavering, Measured. Unhinged, you could calculate because it's just flat. Pumped Up, wouldn't be able to calculate. Brazen, wouldn't be able to calculate. Finisher, wouldn't be able to calculate. As for the builder, I don't know what one he used, but if he used this one, there's a serious problem with this one, okay? Because this will show DPS, or more damage per magazine, etc., etc. Okay, 3.3716. Okay, that's with no talent in. Let's just put glass in. 3716 hasn't changed. Let's put unbreakable in. 3716440 hasn't changed. So I'm not sure what calculator you use, my guy. But I can promise you now, if you use this one, I'm not saying you did, but if you did, your results are wrong. 3 best calculators for the Division 3 are mine, IKEA's, and Scooby's. IKEA is the guy that taught me, and Scooby's runs off of IKEA's work. Here's IKEA's work. There's Chameleon. That's Lexington with Sadist, and this is assuming that you have Sadist active all of the time. If you don't, ends up being about down here where Lexington with Killer is. So everyone, every spreadsheet, every calculator, everyone that knows what they're doing in this game will tell you that Chameleon will outperform Lexington. Everyone. It's okay though, because I need to get off my high horse. That is a negative, Ghost Rider. And the list of things that apparently we can't calculate does actually just continue, because Unstoppable Force, Obliterate, hell, even Strikers, which everyone knows is the highest DPS set in the game, according to this guy isn't, because there's a build-up to it. Heartbreaker, Hunter's Fury, all of these things, anything that has like a condition in order to activate in order for it to work, doesn't contribute to burst DPS, according to this guy, which is just utterly mind-numbing. Right, so to start off, from the first shot fired, it took me 31 seconds to get one of the buffs active on Chameleon. One of them, middle. The very last shot is fired at 8 minutes 14. So from first shot to last shot, I have a 96.19% uptime on Chameleon, essentially. Video would be way too long if I added it in as well, but I did it again with Lexington and Killer, and I ended up with 71.82% uptime. So depending on how you play and how you actually want to do your mission, how your build is set up, it is entirely possible to have a greater uptime on Chameleon than it is Killer or Lexington with Killer. All this being said, and it's going to be the main argument, and I agree with you, is Lexington more comfortable and easier to use, less messing about, doesn't make you feel like you're rushed and panicked because you need or want to keep those buffs active for every engagement? Yes, absolutely. For this, I agree, Lexington. Is Lexington outperforming Chameleon in terms of DPS? At base, no. Chameleon's on average about 6% behind. However, there is one problem. After each engagement, Killer will eventually run out. As you can see, after each engagement, that buff I've got on Chameleon refreshes and is ready to start again, which means at each engagement, what I'm looking at is this. This is an average of 30.57% more. So yeah, Lexington isn't keeping up. And even if Lexington did get Killer active, I'm still doing an average of 9.51% more. See, the reason we calculate something like Chameleon's talent into DPS is the simple fact that it carries over. Even after this engagement, I can change room. I can mess about. I can do some star jumps. It's absolutely great. And when I enter the next engagement, which is what you're about to see now, the buffs are still there. And the great part is it has more buffs. It has 3 of them, which is absolutely fantastic. As you can see, I now have 2 buffs. What does 2 buffs look like? Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Admittedly, this is Lexington without Killer, because who knows, maybe Killer hasn't activated yet, because it's a chance. But let's just say by some, well, it wouldn't be some miracle, it would actually just be, probability. I mean, it closes the gap a bit, but we're still talking about a 36% difference, and that's about as high as Lexington is able to go in comparison to Chameleon. Now, we can get the 3rd buff on Chameleon, which increases our sustained DPS, which, I mean, again, the gap is about the same, but the notion that Lexington is actively able to keep up with something like Chameleon in terms of DPS is absolutely bogus. Now, for my next trick, what I did was take all of the uptime calculations that I did for both recordings of Chameleon with, well, which is the one you can see on screen now, and then the one with Lexington that I did with Killer, calculate the full uptime, and then calculate that uptime into the talent. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm calculating the average DPS, burst DPS, at any given point throughout the entire mission. Now, there is going to be 2 things wrong with this. Not all the time am I going to have Unstoppable Force active, and not all the time am I going to have Strikers at max. However, I'm going to be keeping these active and at max so that you can just see the difference in nature between the Chameleon buffs and Killer on Lexington, with the respective uptime that I got in the missions that I did. I did both play run-throughs with the weapons on Air and Space Museum, both invaded, by the way. Now, granted, depending on how you play, what you play as, how you build, how aggressive you are, these numbers will very much change for you. This is just one test that I did, which will hopefully show you the difference in nature between them. However, from what I have tested previously, as long as you are a semi-competent player that's able to use Chameleon, there is near enough nothing that can compete with it. Nothing. And here is the difference. Now, granted, running one test isn't probably going to be that accurate. This is Killer with a 71.82% uptime. Middle buff on Chameleon with an 96.12% uptime. And top buff with a 61.28% uptime. So even on Chameleon, like the 2 buffs I have calculated independently to hopefully show the respective point. Just for show, this works out to 87% weapon damage from the middle buff, and it works out to about 36.7 critical hit damage from the top buff. I am at 50% crit chance. The crit chance buff won't be 20%, it would be 12, which still puts me at 60. So, Now, despite this, does this mean that Chameleon is going to outperform something like Lexington within all facets of the game? No. And speaking from experience, although there are ways in which to help bolster the range of something like Chameleon, it's annoying to do, and honestly just put Lexington on and do it anyway. The accuracy and overall range effect of Lexington does far exceed that of Chameleon. However, what we're now getting down to is like the nitty-gritties of personal preference. I, for one, personally prefer Chameleon. I play very aggressively. I like being up in your face. I like the fire rate of it, because even if we just calculate the fire rate effect of stat gain, Chameleon does have a faster fire rate, so it is going to build stacks quicker, which, although it never fully closes the gap, it does get it to within like 4%. Doesn't seem like a lot, but the gap is like originally near enough 6%, so it closes 2% pretty damn quickly. However, anyway, that is going to be it for this video. Hopefully we've all learned something. In the meantime though, have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.